Salute family and welcome back to another video. This is Black Truth United, and today we're going to be covering the history of Latinos aligning themselves with white extremists. So these are not just your average white people, these are people who are outwardly hateful toward foundational black Americans, those who are outward and prideful about conquering, enslaving, being violent toward, SAing, etc. principally black people, but also other groups. And by the end of this video, anyone who's listening should know that just as Brother Black Alpha covered in his now classic video, the minority no-alition, which the Black and Brown no-alition is a part of, most, not all, but most of these Latinos carry anti-black sentiments.
And at least enough of them align with white extremists.
And there's no way we can align with the people who would support and or silently agree with white supremacists and those in their communities who support them. So let me knock this out first. On the thumbnail we have Nick Fuentes to the left, who's an open wannabe Nazi. You have the Enrique Tarrio guy to the right of him, who was the quote-unquote leader of the Proud Boys, and then to the right of him you have the Latino white supremacist mass shooter named Mauricio Garcia, who also was an undercover wannabe Nazi. So these are the obvious examples that we've seen in recent years, but they're far from the only ones. And with the history we'll be covering today, there should be no surprise as to why and how these kind of creatures come into existence. So first we're going to start off by going into the old classic history books from school. Yes, I'm going here.
In 1519, Hernan Cortes, an educated man with considerable ability as a leader, led an expedition of 600 men to the coast of Mexico. After hearing rumors of a great kingdom in the interior, he began to strike inland. Pitched battles were fought with towns subject to the Aztec Empire, but after gaining these victories, Cortes was able to enlist the defeated people's support against their quote-unquote overlords. Now, of course, this is white supremacist framing, but it does show a key point as far as those who have been defeated in Latin America deciding to side with white supremacists against their own. Now, they may not have comprehended all of the implications of siding with Cortes, but nevertheless, it led to their complete and utter destruction and white supremacist subjugation after the Aztecs were conquered. And that's not the only kingdom. Francisco Pizarro was another one who conquered the Inca Empire. And we read right here, once again, using guile and audacity, fewer than 200 Spaniards and their Indian allies brought down a great empire. They used rival tribes or villages who may not have liked the Incan rule to undermine their own in favor of white supremacists. And many of the people who went against their own kingdoms started to get amalgamated in to the white supremacist ideology by becoming an elite buffer group against the other people who dwelt in that land. The mestizos in particular were allowed special privileges as long as they showed special loyalty and they thought like a Spaniard. They had to adopt the white supremacist ideology in order to receive those benefits. And yes, these Spaniards were white supremacists. If you don't believe me, look up the Doctrine of Discovery, issued by Pope Nicholas V. Now, this particular document is a response from the Catholic Church regarding their demonic white supremacist decree that was signed by their leaderships of enslaving and subjugating whole races of people and justifying it using their pagan religion, all while calling other people pagans. The Pope himself granted full and free permission to invade, search out, capture, and subjugate. Gotta read between the lines here. They were talking about SAing, unaliving, enslaving, etc., etc. The Saracens, typically those were Muslims, and pagans, anyone who didn't bow down to the fake Christian beliefs, and any other unbelievers and enemies of Christ. Cap. Wherever they may be, as well as their kingdoms, duchies, counties, principalities, and other property, and to reduce their persons into perpetual servitude. This was sanctioned by the Catholic Church, which had a heavy hand in the colonization process of Latin America. So yes, Cortes and Pizarro and many others, Columbus, etc., were following this evil white supremacist doctrine. Because it's nothing more than I might not say so. They could say anyone's a pagan, anyone's an unbeliever, anyone who they didn't like. And when you look at the people who were considered all these things, well, what do you know? For the most part, they were all highly melanated, indigenous peoples, and sometimes other quote-unquote people of color, all across the world. So it just so happened to be a policy for subjugating almost entirely non-white people.
a white supremacist doctrine which was supported by white supremacist extremists, just like Cortez.
And many Latinos went along with it, some of them going as far as to pay to be classified as white, as I covered in the Gracias Al Sacar video. They were paying not to destroy the system that was corrupt from the core and that oppressed their racial group, but rather they were paying to instead be a part of the oppressor class and subjugate their own people, who they disowned. Latinos aligning themselves with white supremacists.
Extremist.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Now we're going to go into some history that I'm pretty sure you've never heard of unless you're a history buff. Specifically about the
Falklands War
between the UK and Argentina. Yeah, a lot of you have never heard of this. I had never heard of it until an acquaintance from Argentina told me about it. So now you'll get the history.
The Falklands War
is essentially a brief scuffle between the UK and Argentina over the Falkland Islands, which was a territory owned for a long time by Argentina. This article is obviously skewed in favor of Great Britain, but what is true is the fact that once oil reserves were found on the Falkland Islands, everything changed. And the British wanted to secure that asset for themselves. And so they started a mini war. Now, instead of the rest of Latin America siding with Argentina, they either stayed neutral or, in the case of the Chileans, worked against Argentina and sided with the UK, the OG white supremacists, with a secret pact. And Argentinians are still pissed off about this to this day. They've never forgiven the Chileans for this. But yes, during the brief exchange, Chile was providing all types of military intelligence while pretending to stay neutral, running political interference, letting the British use their airspace and in some cases their markings for spy crafts, just all types of assistance. Now, I'm not saying it was impossible for Argentina to win, but it would have been very difficult. But Chile certainly didn't help. And this is why when you hear videos of Latinos saying, "We've got a lot of backup, we've got these people and those people in Guatemala and Nicaragua," and a lot of these countries absolutely hate one another. They don't have any allegiance. It's a whole mess. And stuff like this, with them aligning with white supremacists, makes it damn near impossible for them to work together. No one trusts anyone. Much like in the African continent. Everyone's undermining everyone, trying to show out for white daddy. But anyway, after the brief conflict, of course, Argentina was forced to surrender the Falkland Islands. And look at how this article frames it. Returned back to British control. Mind you, the British only controlled the Falkland Islands for like 9 years. After that, at the most, you could call it a pit stop for UK ships. But you know how white supremacists are. It's "I'm white and I say so." They claimed it was largely uninhabited and that Argentina only had competing claims for the islands. But I have it on good authority that that territory was widely known as being Argentina's, whether or not the British used it on occasion. And this is what you get when you align with white supremacists. Every once in a while they pop up and show you who's really in control. And some of you may be saying, "Hey man, that's not fair, man. Chile did Argentina wrong. That's bad. I feel bad for the Argentinians." Well, let's not forget that Argentina has a very tainted record when it comes to supporting white extremists as well. Let me remind you that Paraguay, Uruguay, and Argentina had many corporate entities which existed prior to World War II, which maintained direct ties to Germany and Italy. These companies engaged in direct business with the Nazi war machine, when most of the world had an economic embargo against the Hitler regime. These companies were vital for supplying the Nazis with raw material and a banking mechanism to purchase war munitions. It is well documented that these countries served as the primary refuge for Nazi officials during the fall of the Third Reich. Yes, you heard that correctly. Truth be told, a lot of Latin America, including Mexico, but primarily South America, became the refuge for Nazi extremists. They created direct channels, with the help of the Vatican, mind you, there's the Catholic Church connection to white supremacy again, in order to smuggle Nazis over to their safe havens. Here it mentions Brazil, Chile, and Argentina. So yes, it's hard to sympathize with Argentinians when they for the most part were open supporters and or sympathizers with Nazi extremists who are
obviously anti-black. And that's not the only stain on Argentina's record, because for those who didn't know, Argentina was quietly committing a genocide against its black population in the mid-1800s. They did their own version of mass incarceration, forced military service to the front lines, deprived them of health care and resources that the white Argentinians received. They've always been known as extremely anti-black in Argentina. In fact, they brag about being considered the whitest country in Latin America. And they're not the only one. All across Latin America, you have genocides going on, affecting the black and indigenous populations. In Colombia, in Guatemala, in Brazil, everywhere you turn around, there's a genocide being committed against the indigenous and black population. And mind you, some of these people from these Latin American countries would come to us bragging about being descendants of Mayans and Aztecs. Yet in their own countries, the people and the government are working together to destroy those very populations. Absolutely sickening. And on a quick side note, yes, I know this reference is from a forum, but it's actually very accurate. I've heard this from the people.
They have so much hatred for the indigenous population that they actually use the term Indian as a slur toward one another.
Indio
is how you say Indian in Spanish.
And they use this as a pejorative in Latin America, especially in Mexico. Let me read this for you,
because the commenter is very accurate. Indigenous peoples in Mexico are generally at the bottom of the economic and social ladder. The native people generally have darker skin than people with European and mixed ancestry. So for many people to call someone Indio is to say that they are dirty, uneducated, that's the main thing that they use it for, poor, dark-skinned, in short, undesirable. I've heard people use this slur to people. If someone does something stupid, instead of saying estupido, they'll say, eres bien indio. Don't let these people lie to you and say that they're proud of and that they love the so-called black and indigenous roots that they have. Most of these people absolutely hate the black/indigenous populations of their respective countries. White supremacists have the system on autopilot. Their minions, some of whom come from these very ancestries, attacking and genociding the black and indigenous people from their homelands. And in some cases, the people aren't even from their own homelands. That was the case in the Dominican Republic, which I guess, if you want to be technical, is all a part of the same island. But there's a border separating the Dominican Republic from Haiti. And that island has a lot of clashes throughout history between people who had different skin complexions and ancestry. But one in particular, which happened relatively recently, is a permanent stain on the Dominican Republic. The 1937 Haitian massacre, in which those from the Dominican Republic massacred, they claim, up to 30,000 people. And this wasn't your average massacre. This was completely vicious and satanic. Here's a Washington Post article from 1937 where the unalivings were described. Let me read this. The men were clubbed first, then hacked to death with machetes. Women were told to raise their right arm and were killed with 3-pointed daggers. And the children were tossed on bayonets. This is who we're told we need to align with. Anti-black, Latino bigots from the Dominican Republic who committed vicious, Nazi-like acts, white supremacist acts against the Haitians, who they deemed were darker and inferior to them. Yes, I know there were a few other points, but that was the main thing. The Dominican Republic wanted to do an ethnic cleansing of their population, and they saw the Haitians as an easy target. And of course, I don't discount the fact that white supremacists in the CIA and other organizations could have been at least partially involved with some of these atrocities. But we're not going to infantilize these people as if they didn't know any better. These are the people we're told we need to align with. People who in their own respective countries are actively genociding and or racially discriminating against the black/indigenous populations. And here's a question for my audience. You can put this in the comment section. When's the last time foundational black Americans committed a genocide against any other group? I'm not talking about a justified battle or beef. I'm talking about actively, violently attacking a group based on race. Again, since our ethnogenesis here in the United States, name me one time we did anything even close to what they have going on in Brazil, Colombia, Guatemala, the Dominican Republic, any of these places where they're committing genocidal acts, extreme oppressive, racially charged acts in mass against the population. Again, with the consensus from us as a whole, not one or two dusty people unaliving someone from an ethnic group. Talking about as a group. But I digress. Now let's dip into the United States, because in my last video I briefly touched on how Latinos were working with white supremacists during Jim Crow to uphold racial segregation, specifically excluding us, in hopes to form an alliance with Whitey. But did you also know that Latinos and specifically Mexicans were participating in lynchings? Oh yeah, we're going there. Here's an excerpt from the book 100 Years of Lynchings. This is 1917. 800 oil field workers, whites, Mexicans, Germans, and Italians participated in this lynching of a brother named Bert Smith, who was a member of, when it says the race, it's talking about the quote-unquote Negro race, a foundational black American. This is the Chicago Defender, and he was horribly mutilated, or as the title says, unsexed. They removed his genitals, in other words. This is who we're told we're supposed to align with. People who participated in lynchings during the Jim Crow era. Then they had the nerve to try to say there was Juan Crow. That pissed me off. And by the way, this genital mutilation stuff is not foreign to Mexicans. For those who know about the Mexican gangs, specifically the Zetas, are known for all types of cruel and demonic acts, not only against gang members, but against civilians. They don't give a damn who you are. They target anyone and everyone in their way. They act more like mercenaries, by the way. Sometimes one cartel will employ them and then another will outbid the other. But just so you know, this practice is not unique to the white supremacists here in the United States. Again, Latinos aligning themselves with white extremists. And by the way, most of the things that people were lynched for were fabricated stories. That was proven throughout that book. Time and time again, mostly white people would come out and later say, yeah, it was actually me who unalived my mother. Yes, it was actually me who essayed my cousin, etc., etc. Yes, I blamed it on the black person. And none of these people had an opportunity to clear their names. Hence, lynchings. But I digress. Let's keep going, because some of you remember in a previous video I mentioned how the Cubans aligned themselves with apartheid South Africa. Yes, we're going here. Once again, the Cubans here, for the most part, hated Fidel Castro so much that they staged a counter-protest against Mandela, who had aligned with Castro, aligning themselves with South African apartheid. This is the history they don't want you to remember, but we're covering it today because I don't want anyone to come back and start talking slick about how we're all the same and we're all in this together, when these people openly support white extremists. Heading into the modern day, white supremacist Latinos who have committed mass unalivings have openly attacked foundational black Americans, verbally and physically, especially when they have numbers. But also, for those who don't know, Latinos are integral in a lot of these white supremacist groups. You have plenty of Latinos who are part of the skinheads. In Orange County, specifically, you have La Abra skins, which is a subset of the skinheads, and they have several Latino members. In addition to that, Latinos, when they're in prison, specifically in California, align themselves with the Aryan Brotherhood, who's also closely connected with the white supremacist group called the Peckerwoods. Then you have the Hells Angels, which the Mexican cartel aligns itself with, another white supremacist group. And for those who are still questioning whether the Hells Angels are white supremacists, I challenge you to look up the various cases that they've had over the years of racialized attacks and unalivings. They're pretty much only known for three things: motorcycles, meth, and anti-black racism. Latinos aligning themselves with white supremacists. And of course I would be remiss if I didn't mention the biggest tax-funded street gang in existence, namely law enforcement, which has been infiltrated by white supremacist groups. This is the 2006 report. If you're over on my Patreon, you already have this, as well as the 2020 hearing about the infiltration of white supremacist groups in law enforcement. A lot of times these Latinos are in some of these gangs, committing acts of anti-black, specifically anti-FBA, violence and coercion, funneling our people through the criminal injustice system, planting drugs, unjustly arresting us, harassing us, etc., etc. This is why it's no surprise when you have people like Zimmerman, people like Yanez, and various others. We could spend all day talking about anti-black Latinos who serve in law enforcement, who are aligned completely with white supremacists, whether we find direct ties to them or not. There are very few degrees of separation between these Latinos and white people when it comes to the police force, and really just speaking in general. Virtually any time you have these Latinos in large numbers or in some kind of high position, they're working to undermine and sabotage us and uphold the corrupt system of white supremacy.
So now we're going to go into Latinos aligning themselves more with just white supremacists, not necessarily extremists. But the facts still remain. The same group of people sabotaging us, aligning with white supremacists to undermine our efforts. One of the more famous examples is the Nuri Martinez clown in the LA City Council. But that's kind of old news, that's 2022. Now we have a more recent case coming out of New Jersey with Councilman Luis Valles, who made terroristic threats against Councilman Mike Jackson, I'm pretty sure he's FBA, allegedly threatening him with a gun during a council meeting. These are the people we're told we need to align with. And even if they're not necessarily elected or working in the political realm, some of them work as commentators, like this clown Coleman Hughes, whose real name is Coleman Cruz, and who uses his melanin to speak openly against reparations for foundational black Americans. I haven't heard any Latinos coming out condemning what this clown has said, and I venture to say that most of them agree with him. They hate the idea of us having even a tiny foothold in this country, which we built. Every time you turn around, they're fighting with the white supremacists against us.
Just as they did in the Gracias Al Sacar days. Instead of fighting for everyone to be treated fairly, they fought for themselves to be a part of the oppressor class. That's their legacy. And this is what our people need to be aware of. Let's take Miami for example. Latinos and especially Cubans in Miami started flexing about the power that they had amassed, pretending as if they got it on their own and pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, and they were just so community oriented and this and that, when it had nothing to do with hard work. It had everything to do with us getting gentrified, our land getting stolen, eminent domained out of our properties, out of our homes, out of our businesses, us being systematically shoveled into low-income housing where we were paying rent, not owning anything, while at the same time papering up, giving benefits to, and politically and militarily backing these Latinos' interests. They, like all the other groups here in the United States, were not sabotaged. That's the key difference between these other groups. Foundational black Americans are the only people who get constantly sabotaged every time we build something. Seneca Village, Rosewood, Black Wall Street, successful towns in Oklahoma, Texas, Wilmington. We can be here all day. Railroads, highways, everything dumped in our districts. No other group has had to suffer through that constant sabotage. Yet we're told that other groups succeed because they're hardworking and we just need to stop being lazy. But I digress. That's Miami. Obviously you have LA, where you have violent Latinos attacking and in some cases unaliving our people. Again, whenever they have the numbers, this is what happens. And of course they're going to have the numbers when you have Democrats and secretly Republicans funneling in millions and millions of people and saying, hey, go compete with the 500,000 people who want your business, who want your house, and who are given preferential treatment. Go compete with them. It's simply not possible. Oh, you're doing well? You've lasted the last 30 years? Oh, okay. Dump another 100,000 on them. Make sure it's right in their neighborhood. Let's see how they last. We'll come back in 8 years. May not even take that long. This is what they do. Mind you, none of us could do this in any of their countries. We would be ousted the very second we even thought about it. Yet the country that we built from the ground up is supposed to be a free, open territory where anyone and anyone can just plop up and pull up a plate and start eating, while we, the builders, can't even get those resources. Absolutely sickening. Now this case comes from New York, and keep in mind this story is very disturbing. It's one that really pissed me off, more so than a lot of cases. But I want you to keep in mind, we're talking about Latinos aligning themselves with white extremists. I want you to take a look at this image. I did black out our brother Jordan Neely's face, and I want you to tell me what you see. You have one definite Latino and another suspected Latino, dark-skinned Latino, watching and assisting Daniel Penny in the murder of Jordan Neely. This is the Black and Brown Coalition in one image. Now mind you, these weren't the only Latinos on the train. For those who didn't know, the person who was recording was a Latino, and he wasn't the only one recording. There was another 17-year-old female who was also a Latino who was recording the incident, and her testimony was used as a de facto white woman testimony to justify the unaliving of our brother. Listen to this spicy Karen talk. Neely walked into the train behind her, ranting about being homeless and hungry, taking off his sweater and throwing it on the floor. Notice he didn't attack anyone. He didn't even touch anyone with that sweater. She said she was so nervous that she dropped her head into her friend's chest, but heard the sound of someone and looked up and saw the white savior, Daniel Penny, with a chokehold on Neely. This I was in fear for my life nonsense from this 17-year-old Latina was used to justify the unaliving of Jordan Neely. Damn near every single time you're dealing with a Latino, they're aligning themselves with suspected white supremacists. There are very few exceptions to the rule. And let's not forget this last example. Fair use. Fair use.
No more money for you. Bye bye, bye bye, bye bye. Go back, cross the no more money for you. It's lazy, you lazy. You lazy. No more money for you.
Absolutely no one listening to the sound of my voice can go to this male's country, wherever he's from, Venezuela, Colombia, wherever he may be from, and pull this same thing. And notice the people in the back smiling. A lot of the Latina females, they're in on it too. They're not innocent. They may not say his words openly, but they agree with what he said. Going to a country that's not yours, expecting to get all kinds of benefits that the population that's there cannot receive, and in addition, openly showing disdain and disrespect for the inhabitants of that country, the citizens. This was beyond disrespectful, and we will not forget this clip. Once again, how many Latinos have you heard condemning these words? I posit to you that most of them share this demonic male's anti-black sentiment, and this is really the Blackandbrownnoalition.
It has been a one-sided leeching mechanism for the Latinos to get their weight up, all while they secretly and sometimes openly have complete contempt and hatred for us, all while benefiting from the struggles that we went through, from the civil rights legislation, etc., which they didn't fight for. They were fighting for themselves to be classified as white. And that's why I have zero hesitation when it comes to promoting ICE, not just for the Latinos, but for all other illegal immigrants who hold anti-black sentiments. They need to be out of this country. We've got enough problems dealing with the white supremacist on our own. We don't need other buffer groups coming in here, creating a wedge and a shield for suspected white supremacists to hide behind, using their melanin to undermine our efforts. I can't be racist. I'm a Latino. I'm East African. I'm an Asian. Everyone listening to the sound of my voice, you know someone or some workplace who's hosting illegal immigrants. Here's the website on your screen, because the phone number is typically too busy. The ICE form does not take that long to fill out. You only have to fill in the areas that have the asterisks, and from there you're good. Let ICE do their job. I'm certainly not getting in the way of them. And if they ask me for help, I'm going to reflect back to what their own leader said regarding us. He said, let the Negro fight his own battles. I say, let the Latinos and all these other groups, Asian, Hispanic, Arab, everyone, Ukrainian, all these different people, let them fight their own battles. There's simply too much hatred against us and too thin of a line between them and our open enemies, the white supremacists, for us to continue some fake fairy tale black and brown alliance. There may be individuals who you can work with, but as a whole, foundational black Americans cannot stand to continue fighting for groups who hate our guts. Now, with all that being said, hopefully this video has been informative.
I do want to take some time out to shout out 3 contributors to the platform: Shabazz Navarra, Sister C. Terry, and Brother Carl Miller. My sincere thanks. And in addition to that, I've decided for November, with the upcoming funny video that I'm making, that I'm just going to list all of the people who have contributed to the platform in the month of November in the credits. So much respect to everyone, much appreciated, and prepare yourself for this upcoming video. I'm not going to spoil anything, but just know that the UK tethers are going to be checked all the way, so be sure to tune in with us. It's not going to be a long video. That'll be coming out next week. So with all that being said, be one and be blessed, family. Peace.